Well, it's official. Russia has launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Air raid sirens are blaring across Kiev. An exodus has reportedly begun, and Russian troops have started crossing the state border in areas like Kherson and Kharkiv. I'm joined now by CivilNet host and analyst Eric Hacopian to get his reaction and to find out what this means for Armenia. So, Eric, thanks for your time. I mean, in general, the world's attention is now on Moscow and Kiev. What was your reaction when you woke up this morning?
Well, I was, it's hard not to be, we shouldn't be surprised, but it's still shocking because many of us hoped that it would not come to this, that there would be some kind of an understanding that would prevent this, and we want to have full-scale war. And it appears to be, to everyone, that at this point we have full-scale war. With implications that are frankly quite serious. This is probably the most serious moment on the European continent since the end of World War II. And what we're really seeing this morning, essentially the entirety of the political settlement or structure that existed after the collapse of the Soviet Union came to an end. From today on, we have a new world. What that world is, how much more dangerous, how it creates a new settlement or a new status quo, time will tell. But what we do know today is that post-1991 to 2022 world has been shattered. Everything essentially begins anew this morning.
And this is going to mean a lot for Armenia. We're going to unpack that. But first, several Western leaders have pledged to cripple Russia's economy. The ruble is plummeting. The stock market was quaking this morning. This will have an impact on Armenia's economy. There is a lot of integration between Armenia and Russia's economy. So what do you think are the risks for Armenia?
Well, I think there's two sets of risks. I think there's the immediate risks, which is any negative economic situation in Russia, this will certainly lead to. There's really no way around it at this point. A devaluation of the ruble decreases Russian consumers' buying power, which means one of our primary export markets has less money to spend to buy the things that we export to them, and that would be across the board, but obviously it'll affect us. Secondly is there's hundreds of thousands of Armenians that live or work in Russia and send money back to their relatives, and with a weaker ruble, that actually means less drums. Or less dollars if they convert it to that. So it's going to have an economic impact in the sense that remission income is going to go down. I mean, over the last many years, it's becoming a smaller part of our economy, but it's still a significant part of our economy. So those are the two immediate effects. However, if these sanctions are in place, if this crisis continues, if oil goes up to the 120, 130, 140 range, historically, extreme high energy prices lead to a worldwide recession, which leads to a collapse of oil prices in the long run. But if you look at it historically, there's almost a direct correlation between the highest energy prices and a recession that comes after that, because of how important energy costs are in almost every country's, especially the transportation systems of every country.
And by coincidence, the Armenian defense minister, Suren Papikyan, is in Moscow as we speak, meeting with the Russian defense minister, Sergei Shoigu. How should Armenia approach this conflict between Ukraine and Russia?
With as much distance as possible, to the extent that is politically feasible and politically possible, when both sides, and in this case the Russian side, is essentially pressing everyone to take sides. Obviously, we don't want any direct role in this military operation, and I don't think we've been asked to have any direct role in this military operation. And even yesterday, the Armenian Foreign Ministry said that they do not plan to recognize the two breakaway Russian provinces in the Ukraine that the Russians and some other countries recognized. So obviously, I think this government is trying to keep a level of neutrality, but we will need to see how long that lasts.
And what led us to this point? Vladimir Putin has made the point several times that when the Cold War ended, the West gave a guarantee that from Berlin, not an inch east. And now the Baltic countries, Poland, Romania are all members of NATO, and Ukraine has now moved from the Russian sphere of influence to the Western sphere of influence. So what do you think led us to this point?
There's two roads to this morning. There's the short road, which is everything that's been going on for the last couple of months and some level the last couple of years. And then there's the long road, which started in essentially 1997 with the entry of the first two former Warsaw Pact countries into NATO, which was in 1997. Now, if we go back to 1997, George Kennan, who was the architect of American foreign policy post-World War II, called it a humongous strategic mistake for the United States. Russia was weak at that point. The West could impose its will. And he warned of a revanchism that would be the response to this. And I think what we're seeing today is that revanchism, in which what is perceived on the Russian side is this effort to continually push them back, to marginalize them, and not to treat them like a serious power, essentially led to what happened this morning. And there's also a corollary to this. I think that there's been a red line about Georgia and Ukraine joining NATO, and we saw it in 2008 with the war in Georgia, and we're seeing it today in the Ukraine. You can disagree with them, but the Russian position on this issue has been very clear. To them, Ukrainian membership in NATO is non-negotiable. So I think if you look at what we know over the operations today is essentially to militarily entirely destroy the military capability of Ukraine, which is happening with the air defenses being destroyed. Most of the airfields have been hit. It's essentially to whatever the EU and NATO has invested in the Ukrainian military is being destroyed as we speak. And I think it would be suicide for the Russians to try to occupy all of Ukraine. They don't have the troops to do that, and it will be a nightmare. I think their goal is to make an inoperable, just a dysfunctional country that's lost significant amounts of territory, that cannot in any cohesive way present any future threat, or facilitate some kind of a regime change, which I think will be hard to do, because obviously a reaction like this doesn't lead to people wanting to overthrow their government. It essentially people rally to their government. There's going to be tremendous backlash to this. But this has been coming for a long time, and it really didn't have to be this way if enough people on all sides were willing not to have maximalist positions.
You speak of the tremendous backlash, and the West has said that it will respond appropriately. Do you think that the West has some sort of plan?
I'm sure they have a plan, and I think it's going to involve economic sanctions, is essentially, to an extent, doing to Russia what they've done for Iran, specifically what the United States has done to Iran for the past 10, 15 years. However, Iran is a far more marginal country in the context of the world economy. And Russia is a far more relevant country, specifically in the context of Europe, and given that 40% of EU energy comes from Russian sources. You really cannot stop buying Russian gas. You can possibly stop buying Russian oil, but you really can't stop buying unless you're willing to freeze or stop all your industries. So on some level, Russia has tremendous leverage on that. So I think the economic sanctions will go to a level that will significantly damage the Russian economy. I just don't think they can really do what they did to Iran as far as isolating a country of that size and that influence entirely out of the world economic system, when there are other countries that will not stop doing business with them, either as China or Turkey or whoever. And as you know, there's tremendous divisions inside of NATO itself and the EU. There are certain countries that are, I wouldn't say pro-Russia, but not anti-Russian in a very clear way, whether that's Greece, whether that's Hungary. So I think on some level, Putin has a lot of leverage, economic leverage, and energy is the key to that. However, if you push that leverage, what you can also be doing is you can accelerate the decarbonization, if the decision is reached that they need to build massive LNG plants to import gas from the United States, for example, or to accelerate their decarbonization programs even faster, setting up huge battery plants for be able to essentially store renewable energies. In the long run, in the short, medium term, it can have tremendous impact on Russia and other energy producers.
And we're talking about what this means for Armenia. Yesterday, Russian President Vladimir Putin met with Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev, and they signed an agreement to raise relations to an allied level, as it was described. This was the same Aliyev that launched the devastating invasion into Artsakh in 2020. What was your reaction to this news, bearing in mind that Russia is Armenia's #1 security guarantor?
Well, I mean, if you read through, there's two things you got to read through. You got to read through the agreement, and you got to read through the rhetoric back and forth, and it's fascinating. And if you actually read the agreement, if it is implemented in full, it will essentially do away with 25 years of Azeri foreign policy of trying to play East against West, Turkey against Russia, is because it essentially, the Russians did away with that if this agreement is implemented in one afternoon. Essentially, if you read through the points, it's very clear that they intend to bring in Azerbaijan into the Eurasian Union. Mm-hmm. You're talking about joint military exercises, which only the Turks get to do with the Russians, and I think this has to do with a Russian attempt to try to stop Turkish influence in the Azeri military, because the Turks that systematically try to get rid of all the Russian-related generals, for example, that was happening during the war and after. And interestingly enough, there's not a single word of Turkey in any of these discussions, and in the two speeches that the two presidents made. If you look at the body language, it was very clear that this was a forced marriage. I think Aliyev understood the implications, and then in the rhetoric back and forth, Putin makes very clear that the Artsakh issue is not settled. Mm-hmm. He made that point twice, actually, and that we've made progress on it, but the issue has not been settled. And then Aliyev makes a speech thanking the Russians for all the things they're doing about negotiating roadways and this and this and this, and even contradicting Putin, saying we actually have more Russian language schools than you claimed. And he very meekly says the Artsakh issue is settled. And all of this was being done the day that the Russian Duma was ratifying the independence of the two, or recognition of the two breakaway provinces, Donetsk and Luhansk in Ukraine. And if you know anything about President Putin, is these things are not accidents. I think in his case, even his mistakes are planned. I think in this case, he wanted to make very clear that when we go somewhere, we don't leave. Hmm. And I think that was the implication of that conversation.
Mm. And finally, what do you think today's events say about the West's standing in the world in terms of the global order and Russia's standing in the world?
I think this is very clear that the Russians perceive the West to be weaker mm-hmm. than it is. I think they are correct when it comes to coherence of policy, when it comes to military matters, because even if Ukraine was part of NATO, there's no force posture right now. NATO would not have the capability of stopping such an invasion. So they're essentially calling the West's bluff that you have no way of protecting your new dependencies. This is very court-huddled and hard politics. But I think this is a calculated risk, and I think it's partly based on fear and defense, and the fear that if Ukraine goes out of the Russian orbit, it's an existential issue for Russia. You can argue back and forth, but I think this is very clearly their understanding, and this is why they were willing to take such a dramatic risk. This is undoing the world order, and I think they probably feel confident that given the divisions in the West if they don't go too far, they can get their way of making essentially politically Ukraine an inoperable state, in which that the state might exist, but it's in very limited form, with large parts of its country occupied and its entire defense capacity destroyed. And the parts of Ukraine that are being attacked right now are where some of the biggest heavy industries in Ukraine, especially in the military sphere, tank factories, things like that. So I think they're essentially neutering the Ukrainian state, even if it continues to exist. And the only thing that could have prevented that is a very firm commitment from the West for the neutrality of Ukraine. And they're essentially their non-ever membership in NATO. So I think they think they have the advantage in the short run and are able to impose this, and there's enough divisions in the West. However, this is a very dangerous situation, and even though the Russians can prevail now, in the long term, this hostility against all of the world's economic powers combined is not something that's going to end well on the Russian side, unless there's some kind of a broader compromise. But this has been in the making for 25 years, and this could have been prevented. And I think this is going to have unfortunate implications, pretty much for everyone. There frankly are no winners here, because even if the Russians succeed, all they're doing is preventing something that they theoretically feared, or maybe should fear based on their assumptions. But it's not. They're essentially also creating a cohesive Ukrainian identity and a cohesive Ukrainian state that comes afterward that's going to be uniquely anti-Russian.
Well, Eric, thank you as always.
Thank you.
And for those of you wondering what's happened with Eric's Insights show, we will release the next episode of Insights with Eric Hacopian tomorrow. Thank you very much for your time.